you doing out there? Well, I was about to start making some paper, so if you want to come on in, you can join. Paper making's one of my favorite things to do in the springtime. I feel like I'm usually doing a lot of spring cleaning and find way more paper laying around than any sane person should have. And it's a fun way to get crafty. So I'm glad you're able to join me for it today. So yes, for paper making, you don't need a ton of supplies. And most of the supplies you need you can find at your house. But we'll go through them to start off here. So, I've got a blender. I've got a bunch of old paper, already, torn up all the incriminating documents. I only have some newspaper left. You need water. You need a large container. It can really be anything, as long as it's something you can fill with water and is big enough to fit your frame in. The other thing you're going to need is definitely one frame, 2 if you're feeling extra fancy. In the frame, what you do is you just take an old frame, take the glass out, take the back off, and then you're going to take a piece of screen and just haphazardly staple that on. If you have 2 frames that are the same size, bonus points. That kind of helps create what is called a decal, and that's something that keeps the edges protected and kind of keeps all of your liquid inside when you're doing your paper making. You're also going to need a few extra pieces of screen that are going to be at least big enough to fit over your frame and the paper you've made. And then when I'm making it, there's a billion different ways to make paper. But when I'm making it, I like to have a towel and a rolling pin, kind of pressing mine flat. Alright, so let's get started. First part is just tearing up a bunch of paper. I've got most of this ready to go. Just kind of like small, square-ish pieces. Nothing that's going to be super long, but it's a very imprecise art, paper shredding. Alright, so once you have a good amount of it, you can put it in your blender. And you can try, experiment with different types of paper too. This is mostly newspaper, but I was using almost like tag board earlier today. Kind of play around with it and see what results you get. Alright. So one important thing for paper making is you really want the fibers and everything in the paper to break down. So you want it to be a really watery slurry. So I've got about 4 cups of water in there. Alright. So yeah, if you come and take a look at that, it's got a really well ground up. And everyone's kind of got their own personal preference. Some people like it still a little bit chunky so you can see the texture of the previous paper, but I like it pretty finely ground. So that looks good. And I'm just going to add it, and splatter myself, to something that I was working with earlier. Now I'm going to add the turmeric. So I tried this once before and I did not put enough in. So instead of dyeing it a beautiful, brilliant orange, I just kind of made brown. We'll see how this one turns out. It smells weirdly delicious for being paper. Alright, so it's looking a little brighter. I might add just a little bit more here. And this would be the time too, I'm trying this with turmeric, but you can also be adding acrylic paint or anything like that. So that really, like if you're looking for a way to dye your paper, it's a good time to do it is now. Alright. So now if you can see that, we've got kind of a good sort of golden-y color going on there. I think it's brighter than the last time, so we'll see how that turns out. Alright. So, Next we take our homemade decal here. We're going to put it in the water. Alright. And then the frame over the top. Put that in as well. Okay. And then we're going to pour our slurry in there. Alright. So for this one, I want to make my paper a little bit thicker. So kind of how thick you want your paper to be determines how much slurry mix you put in there. Alright, I'm just going to shake it around a little bit, try and make sure it's fairly evenly spread out. I might put just a little bit more on this side. Okay. Alright, and then, let's see. Once it seems like it's pretty well spread out, you're going to just lift your whole setup up. So lift up the decal, lift up the frame on top, and just let that drain for a little minute. I'm really liking the color that this is turning. Alright, so I'm going to let it just drain a little bit. And then I'm going to take off the frame on top. And now you can kind of see it's still really, really wet. It's really rough. It's just the kind of pulpy beginnings of paper. And this is the time, if you do want to add like flowers or leaves or like any texture elements, now's a good time to do it. So I think I'm actually going to sprinkle a few flower petals in there. These are dried flowers that I found laying around. Let's see here. So I'll just give the final paper a little bit of texture, a little bit of interest in there. I think it'll be pretty. Okay. So once those are on, you're going to take one of your extra pieces of screen and just lay it over the top. Okay? And once you've done that, you're going to take your sponge and just very gently dab over your decal here. So what you're doing is just doing the first round of pushing out all of the excess water, kind of compacting those paper fibers just a little bit. There you go. And this you might want to go over it a few times. Really, like the more times you dab and kind of press the paper out the first time, the less you're going to have to do later. So I'm just going to keep going for a little bit here. Push that water out. You can kind of see it starting to take form a little bit, look a little bit more like paper in there. And those flower petals are getting pressed in really nicely. Alright, so once you've gone over it, and it's not super wet anymore, and you're going to take your decal and your paper, and you're just going to flip the whole thing over. Alright, and then lift the decal off. Sometimes you kind of need to get it started in a corner just to make sure that the paper comes off so it's not too stuck in the decal screen. This one seemed like it was pretty ready to go here. So I'll lift that off. Alright. So you can kind of see it does have a pretty good turmeric yellow going on. And on the screen you can still see it's pretty moist. It doesn't have a lot of it's not holding its own shape super well yet. But that's where the next step will come in. So I'm going to take my second piece of screen here. And if you don't have extra screen, you can use like a thin towel or paper towel or anything. It's really just to keep your paper in making from sticking too much. So you're going to take your rolling pin and just start in the middle and kind of roll out. Roll out in each direction. And just kind of keep pressing that liquid away from the center of your paper here. And every time you're doing that, you're kind of compressing those paper fibers, knocking things down, and really starting to make your paper take form. Alright, so I'm going to take this off. You can see I've turmericed my towel just a little bit. So I'm going to turn that, So I've got a dry surface to be working on here. Flip my paper over. Ooh, and you can see all those little petals. Alright, and then you're just going to do the same thing. So really press down. Try and get as much of that water out as possible, and really to compact those paper fibers as much as you can. Alright. So I'm going to take the top layer of screen off, and now you can see that it really has kind of its own shape there. It's kind of holding together pretty well. And really the only thing left to do now is to let it dry. So you can, put it on my tray here. So yeah, so we're going to put this out to dry, and then we'll be back tomorrow to kind of check in, see how it looks, and I can show you some other examples of the paper that we make this afternoon. Alright, see you in a little bit. Hey, welcome back. So it's been a few days. Instead of putting everything out to dry outside like was my original plan, I ended up having to dry it all inside because it was not a sunny, clear weekend here in Wisconsin. Surprise, surprise. We've got a lot to look at, kind of a lot of fun ways that the paper turned out. So I believe the one that we were working on was this guy. So this was the with the turmeric dye. You can kind of see how a lot of the texture from the screen came through, which if you don't want that texture there, you can always put something smoother over and do another roll with the rolling pin, but I kind of like the texture there. Then we have a lot of the dried flowers coming through as well. Here's one that I did earlier in the day, and this one I wanted to show you just because of how thin it was. So for this guy, I really ground the paper to a really fine pulp, kind of shook it out a lot, and then did a few rounds of pressing it. So if you can kind of see me holding it up to the light here, it's pretty thin paper. You can see my shadow behind it, and like it's pretty easy to fold. Like this is the sort of thing that I could write a letter on, or do an art project on here. Some other fun things that we did is I did one with lavender in it. And so that one smells wonderful, much better than my turmeric paper. And it's got kind of like the little bead, or like the little flower bits in there. And then for this one I put a little bit of acrylic paint in as well. So that's another way you can kind of dye your paper, is mixing up a little bit of acrylic paint with water and then adding that to your pulp. Got another kind of whitish one that's got the petals in it, and the petals really stand out in that one. They really kind of pop. So as you can see, I had a lot of fun kind of experimenting with different ways to make paper and different styles and everything, and I hope you can too. So thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time. Bye.